Hi, boys and girls. This is Grandma Sheila, and I have another story for you today. It's called If You Don't Pay Up, You're Stealing. You know, the Bible tells us that God gives us all the good things we have, but He has asked that we pay Him tithe. Now, tithe is just 1/10 of everything that we make. Now, if you earn a shiny dime, God's part of that dime is 1 penny. All the other 9 parts belongs to you. Well, that's not very much. We get the big part of it. God only asks for a little bit. And you know, He doesn't really keep it for Himself either. It goes to tell other people about Jesus. But it belongs to God. It does. Well, I'm going to tell you the story of Sam and Susan. Well, Sam and Susan, they lived way up in the Ozarks, in the southern part of the United States. Now, a lot of the people that lived there, they were farmers without very much education. And they talked what we would call kind of strange. Sam and Susan got married. And Susan was thinking, you know, when you get married, the Bible says you become one, and hopefully you're on the page with everything that you believe when you marry somebody. One day, after Sam and Susan were married, Susan had been talking to Sam about paying their tithe. She said, Sam, I don't agree with you. The Bible says that the 10th belongs to God, and we're stealing if we don't give it to Him. And Sam said, Susan, I ain't stealing. I'm honest. I give God what I can. And she said, well, Sam, what if you went to the grocery store and you bought $20 worth of groceries and you gave just like $1 to the man at the grocery store? What do you think he would say if you tried to walk out of there with the groceries? He'd say, you're stealing. Sam didn't think it was the same thing. Sometime after that, it must have been bothering Sam, because when they sat down that night, he said to Susan, now, Susan, I think that what we're going to do is we're going to divide the farm, and I'm going to give you your half, and the other half is going to be mine. And Susan said, if you want to do that, Sam, that sounds very good. You know, I don't like to be asking you for money just to get some baking powder or something. It's hard when I have to ask for a nickel and you sigh and go on. Well, if we divide it, I'll buy all my stuff out of my own money. And Sam said, it's agreed then. I'll own half the farm and you'll own the other half. On that farm, they grew corn and they grew wheat. Well, it wasn't hard to divide that up. When harvest time came and they gathered up all that grain and all the corn, they divided it in half. This many bushels belonged to Susan, and that many bushels belonged to Sam. Well, Sam had said, on your half, you can pay tithe. I think it's a bunch of foolishness, but you can do it because you believe it's right. So that's what Susan did. They also had two big chicken coops. And Susan, she took really good care of her chickens. She fed them every day. She took the eggs away every single day she gathered them, sometimes twice a day. And she would sell them to the grocer. And then she would pay her tithe. Well, her chickens laid more and more eggs. But Sam, I don't know what was wrong with Sam, but he would forget to feed his chickens, and he'd forget to give them water. And one day, Susan happened to be walking by that hen house, and she went inside and she said, "Oh, what's going on here?" Part of the chickens looked like they were about ready to drop over dead. Well, she looked around and Sam wasn't anywhere to be seen, so she snuck in some water and some feed for those chickens. But she didn't think that Sam was forgetting to gather the eggs. After a period of time went by, Sam went out to get his eggs, and when he picked them up, they were cracked right down the top. And oh, they smelled awful. They were rotten eggs. Well, of course, he couldn't sell rotten eggs to the grocer. Well, then it was the time of year in the spring when the hens all sat on the eggs and little baby chickens would come out. Sam, his chickens, had some baby chicks, and Susan's chickens had a lot of baby chicks. Every day Susan would go in and she would feed and water those baby chicks. She would make sure that they were kept safe and the chicken coop was all secure so the skunks and the weasels and the minks couldn't get in and eat those chickens. Well, the babies were getting bigger. And every day Susan took care of those baby chicks. And while she was there inside of the chicken coop, she would pray to God to protect her chickens and the baby chicks. Well, Sam's chicks were not doing well at all. And one day he called Susan and he said, "Honey, come over here and look at my baby chicks. There's something wrong with them." So Susan went in and she looked. She picked up one of those chickens, those little baby chicks, and she looked at it and she said, "They've got the gap." Well, I didn't know what gap was, so I had to look that up. But gap is little bitty worms that get inside of the throat of baby chickens. and they die. She said, "Your chickens have got the gap. You haven't been taking good care of them." And so most of his baby chickens died. He said, "I don't know what's going on here." It was time to plant the taters. Well, Susan, she went out and she planted her half of the tater field. And Sam, he planted his part of that tater field. Well, Susan, she took care of hers, and her potato plants got big and luscious and green. But Sam's had bugs. Now, if you've ever seen tater bugs, they will eat the plants. And Sam said, "What's going on with my tater plants?" And Susan, she came over to look and she said, "Sam, you have tater bugs." Sam said, "Well, I can take care of that." So he went and he got his spray. But he wasn't paying much attention. And he sprayed so much on them that it burnt the plants. Well, he had killed the bugs. So the potatoes started to grow some again, but they were stunted. Do you know what that means? That means that instead of being big and green and lush, those potato plants were scrawny and yellow looking. Well, fall came, and it was time to dig the potatoes. Well, Sam and Susan went out together to dig. She to dig her part of the field, and Sam to dig his part. Well, Sam started digging. You know, his potatoes weren't very big. He looked over at Susan. Her potatoes were great big. He said, "Must have been when I planted my potatoes. The moon must not have been in the right place. I didn't plant 'em by the right light of the moon." Well, Susan, she looked at his potatoes and she looked at hers and she said, "I planted mine in the light of providence." Do you know what that means? That the blessing of God was looking down on them. Sam, the blessing of God, the light of providence. She's a paying her tithe. Oh dear. Well, when they got done digging those taters, Sam, he dumped his all out at the ground at the end of his half of the field, and he looked at it, and they were scrawny potatoes. Yes, he had a big mound. But then he watched Susan, and he said, "Where you getting all them there potatoes?" And she said, "I'm a digging 'em." Bucket after bucket she dug. And then she brought them to the end of her field, and she smiled and, oh, she felt sorry for Sam. Sam's pile was about this big, and hers was twice the size. She said, "Sam, I feel sorry for you. God's been a blessing my stuff. When you steal from God, He's not going to bless you." Well, then, they had gone to the grape arbor. Susan had gone out and she had taken her little spade and she'd worked around the vines. She had pulled out all the weeds and she'd fertilized the plants. She made sure they had just enough water. He didn't do what he should for his grapevines. They were side by side. Susan's grapes and Sam's grapes. Some of it was because Sam wasn't taking very good care of things. But Susan knew it was because God wasn't blessing him, because he wasn't giving to God what God asked him to give. When it came time to harvest the grapes, Susan went out with her basket to pick grapes. Sam, come look at all the grapes. So Sam came over from out to the field and he looked at her grapes. He said, they did really good this year, didn't they? They look wonderful. But then he went around to his side of the arbor and the grapes had gotten too much water and all the grapes were moldy and rotting on the vine. That night, Susan said, Sam, I feel really bad for you that you've had the bugs and the worms and the baby chicks and your chickens have died and your half of the taters didn't grow very well and your grapes all molded. Sam, I'm going to make sure I pay my tithe on all the stuff that I've harvested. And then I'm just going to give it all back to you. Because she felt bad for her husband. But then she said, you know, Sam, you could be blessed too. All you have to do is give your tithe, give 1/10 to God. And Susan, she got out her Bible and she said, Sam, listen to this. This is in Malachi. Malachi chapter 3. Now, Sam, listen to what God says. Will a man rob God? Yes, ye have robbed me. But ye say, wherein have we robbed? In tithes and offerings. Ye are cursed with a curse, for ye have robbed me. Sam, if you don't pay your tithe, you're dishonest and you're stealing from God. Then he says, bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in my house, and prove me now herewith. I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing that there shall not be room enough to receive it, Sam. And I will rebuke the devourer for your sake. That's those potato bugs and those worms. And he shall not destroy the fruits of your ground, neither shall your vine cast her fruit before the time in the field, said the Lord of hosts. Sam, he's talking to us in the Bible. Sam, he stood there in his overalls with his hands poked down in his pocket and his head down. He knew that he had been stealing from God, and that's why their farm wasn't blessed. Susan, she went over to her husband and she said, Sam, can't we do what God says to do? Then the whole farm would be blessed. I'm willing to help you. And Sam, just think of it. God lets us have 9 parts, and he only takes one. And he made us. Oh, Sam, we can't steal from God. And boys and girls, Susan was right. The Bible does say, bring you all the tithes into the storehouse, and that he's going to open the windows of heaven and pour down such a blessing that we can't hold it all. That's the kind of God we have if we obey. Don't forget to play your tithes, boys and girls. Thank you. Bye-bye now. I'll see you next week.